I'm going to be talking today about some of our nitrogen decision trials that are in the eFields book. If you hadn't been in here earlier today and don't have an eFields book, I'm going to guess they're going to bring those around for you. Be sure to pick one up. There's a lot of interesting trials in there. I'm going to be talking about the results some and then what we did to make those decisions. So when we think about nitrogen, the first thing we have to think about is everything that goes into that decision. There's a lot more to it to get that rate right than just going out and picking a rate and putting it on the field. I mean, we have to look at all the sources we're going to put on. In a presentation later today, if you stick around in here, we're going to be talking a little bit about that manure source, where you got to think about the operator, make sure they know what they're doing. Make sure our applicators are set up and actually calibrated so we're getting on the amount of nitrogen we expect. Nothing's worse than when you go out with a tank of anhydrous that's supposed to cover 30 acres and 10 acres later it's empty. That's a bad day when you think about how much money you just put on 10 acres. Technology, if you're running variable rate application, making sure that it's all updated and the applicator is actually varying like it's supposed to. If you're here earlier, going back and looking at that as applied map. In fields, you're going to have different soil types. It's really going to vary that nitrogen rate, and we're trying to look at that and figure out how soil types in different management zones maybe are going to come into play. And then weather. Weather's the biggest factor of unknowns when it comes to nitrogen we're probably trying to deal with on a year-to-year basis. So the first thing we have, we go out, we make that nitrogen application. If we're doing pre-plant anhydrous or even a V2, V3 side dress, basically we're picking a rate and we're putting it out there and we hope we got it right for the entire season. Because we have 2 to 3 more months of things that are going to happen to that nitrogen we put on the field. From that application, we can lose nitrogen. It can volatilize up. We have nitrogen gassing off out of the soil. That can happen with any form we put down. If it starts changing into a nitrogen gas through the ammonia form, away it goes and we don't get it into our crop. At least it didn't end up in Lake Erie, though, if it goes up as a gas, I suppose. And then in recent history, it decides to rain every 2 days. About the day the hay was supposed to be dry if you make hay. We get about 3 inches of rain on it. And at that point, it starts to leach out. And that does make Lake Erie unhappy. And away goes all of our nitrates that were free in the soil. It follows that water down and off the field. Maybe it doesn't go into Lake Erie or cities if they have above-ground reservoirs pumping out of streams. They're dealing with nitrates. If you have shallow wells, sometimes we'll actually see nitrates popping up in groundwater. And then we get some good weather. We get a small rainfall event. We get a sunny day, small rainfall event, sunny day. This is what we really want. This is that unknown factor that can make us money. The rest of it's losing us money. We get mineralization going on, and our soils, especially the higher organic matter soils, start making us a profit. And the later we move in the season, the better we can do at capturing this profit from our soil. So we have that nitrogen. It's slippery, it's elusive. We go back to all those things. We don't really know what it's going to do, but our plants, they can uptake the ammonia in the nitrate form. As long as that's in the soil and we can find it there, our plants can take it up. So then we start moving into doing these decision trials. So the first thing we like to start with if we're going to do a nitrogen decision trial is first we go back to that maximum return to nitrogen. We plug in our expected corn price and our nitrogen price. And we're going to use that as a starting block to start making decisions from there based off of what our crop is telling us. Because at the end of the day, it really comes down to profitability. And the first step we can start with is take some of those trials that we keep doing across the state and keep getting rolled into this equation and do a good job of figuring out at least where our expected maximum return on investment should be. So right now, 40 to 45 cents for nitrogen, should be able to price 390 corn. If we price that, our economic return to nitrogen is going to fall between 172 and 179 for that middle number. And we're going to have a range falling in there between 162 and 188. And when we sit down with the cooperator and we start talking about that, we really talk about that range and what they know about their field to start with, to start setting that. If we know we have really high organic matter soils, we know we're going to get a little bit more mineralization, we're going to be more comfortable leaning towards the lower end of that maximum return to nitrogen. If I'm farming my half percent organic matter soil, I'm probably going to think about pushing that higher towards the top end, but really we need to do some more investigation to actually figure out what our soil is going to give us at a given time in that given year. So if you go to the eFields book, there's one economic return to investment trial in there that's just straight rates. We didn't change timing or anything in that trial. Started down at 32 pounds. That was what was put on with the planter. Grew 136 bushel corn. Not that bad on 32 pounds of nitrogen. 132 pounds of nitrogen, 197 bushels, 182 pounds of nitrogen. Right there in that economic range that was running from 165-ish to 188. 205 bushels of corn, $662 return to that acre. We upped it, 232, 282 pounds of nitrogen. What'd corn yield do? Yeah, it went up to 206 and 210, but our return on investment went down. So really, down there at that 180, looks like we did okay. On the economic side, that came to the top, just like the calculator said it was going to. So then we start looking. What else can we do? We really need to do a lot more than just plugging economics in. And we also have to think about this side dress equation. I often question when I can row corn if I can really call that side dress, or if that's really just planter application but not using the planter when I go in at V1 when I can first side dress that. I can move that with that same applicator rig 3 to 4 weeks to this V3 to V5 application window, and I just took away 3 weeks of nitrogen loss potential right there very easily. And then if I want to move that even later, start getting to this mid-season, late V5, I can still get through with most tractors and 28 rigs. I'm probably done side dressing with anhydrous at that point. Those carts are pretty short. How can I move maybe in and make some decisions for mid-season, or maybe get into this late season side dress? How can I change my decisions because of what's going on throughout the year? So we go back and we look at nitrogen loss potential, comparing 2017 to 2018. In 2017, we had excellent mineralization. Our soils gave us lots of nitrogen. In 2018, it was wet. We didn't get the drying periods. We really had poor mineralization. Denitrification and losses, we didn't lose a lot in 17. Go to 18, we had moderate losses to denitrification, and volatilization was moderate in both years. So how can we apply that and start to pull numbers together to do a better job each year? First thing really to look at is how much nitrogen is the crop going to need. Just to pull in, on a 250 bushel corn crop, the average amount of nitrogen that goes off in a bushel of corn is 74 pounds. So if we grow 250 bushels, we're going to actually remove 185 pounds of nitrogen with that crop. The rest of the nitrogen the crop takes up ends up in the fodder. So we start looking, go from 100%, 250 pounds of nitrogen. You have your about 185 if you come back down removed with that crop. We need about 50% of that nitrogen to get us to about V10. So we need a little over 100 pounds of nitrogen to take us to V10 that the crop would typically take in. And if we're going to move that really late, in a few of our trials we actually ended up out there later than what we planned on for our late applications, and we maybe hurt ourselves with yield. So for that R1, R2, late tassel pollination, just after that, we should have probably had 175 to 200 pounds plant available, and we couldn't get that much out of the soil most likely. So we might have hurt yield in late season. So another thing to look at, we start is just setting our rates and not going out. A split application pay. So for split application, we did a V2, V3, so that really early side dress, we could row the corn, so let's go out and put our nitrogen on in case it rains us out. And then V17, so fairly late in that application window. V17, the next step is going to be tassel in that corn plant. Rates that were put on 160, 180, and 230 pounds of nitrogen at that V2, V3. And then when we split it, we did 140 early and then came back with 20 and 40. So 160 and 180 pounds coming back late application. What do we start seeing on the yield and the return on investment? Across all those nitrogen rates, we didn't see a difference in corn yield. 218 to 229 bushels. Fairly close, didn't see a change in yield. We did see some changes in return on investment. It's only 1 year's of data that's shown here. But if we take 160 pounds total with just one application, $714 an acre. 2 applications, we bumped yield. It wasn't significant, but it was $741. We saw an increase in return on investment by adding in that later application. Could we maybe still done 1 application, not been quite as early, and seen those same type of results? Maybe. Can't really tell that from this study, but it's definitely something to think about. So then we start looking at how can we use technology a little bit better and actually start figuring out what Mother Nature is doing to the soil and doing to the nitrogen we put down. So we started looking at using soil tests and tissue tests, and actually did a little bit of NDVI, remote imagery, to try to figure out the crop health and nitrogen potential there. And we did treatments at V5 and V10. In those treatments, we had 0 pounds up front, 210 pounds up front, and 84 pounds up front. Took soil tests. We tested for both nitrate and ammonia nitrogen. because we had commercial fertilizer out there. So we definitely needed to figure out how much ammonia we had in the soil and how much nitrate we had, because we were trying to figure out how much total nitrogen was available at that point. Where we didn't put any nitrogen on, 51 pounds soil available at V5, 37 available at V10. So we're seeing a little bit of nitrogen coming out of that soil. Not bad. 210 pounds of nitrogen put on. V5, 230 pounds. We have a lot of nitrogen available. We have a lot of nitrogen that's losable at that point in time. That's 230 pounds that could get flushed out of the system with some really good rainfall events. 166 pounds at V10. Most of that probably went into the plant. We probably didn't lose a lot from that 166 to 230. Or we had 84 pounds up front, 174 at V5 and 53 at V10. So we're getting some good nitrogen coming out of the soil, and we can tell the difference that what we put on is sticking around. We did do soil or tissue tests. We're really struggling with actually getting the tissue tests to tell us anything we can make a decision on. The tissue tests are telling us that our plant is still growing good, it has enough nitrogen in it. We don't have enough strong data to use that to make decisions right now. So we start looking, what did yield tell us then? So we came back in, total nitrogen applied at that V5 side dress stage, 210 pounds, 255, and 235 pounds, 266 bushels of corn across all of those. I'd be happy with that, that's for sure. Then when we came back late, we pulled those samples at V10. We didn't get back in that field until VT, and that had 84 pounds of nitrogen on it. So we probably started to starve that crop by the time we got in there at VT. But you got to remember, last year, we were going a growth stage or two per day. This corn was growing faster than we've probably ever seen corn grow in my lifetime, probably most of yours from other people I've talked to that are much older. But that corn was growing fast, and we had rain. It was challenging to get in the field. But we still came back in, 210 pounds of nitrogen, 250 bushels of corn. Then we go to the next trial. In this trial, we had V5 and V10 again, pulled the tissue test up front, 0 pounds, 180 pounds, and 70 pounds of nitrogen. And you see those same similar trends, that we can find it in the soil, our nitrogen was sticking around. The V5, without any nitrogen put on, 108 pounds of soil available nitrogen. Pretty good farm, doing well. Had it down to 24 pounds though by V10. 180, 229 pounds plant available. Quite a bit's coming out of the soil. 87 pounds at V10. And those tissue tests are all above the sufficiency range when we pulled the test. Now, this one we got in there a little bit earlier, V13, and we start to see a little bit of difference. Got that nitrogen on before it was trying to throw tassels on us. So when we put down at planting control, 180 pounds of nitrogen, 218 pounds or bushels of corn. And then we look at V5 side dress, increasing. The rates did not significantly increase yield. It looks significant, but there was a lot of variability. If you were in one of the earlier presentations, there was a lot of that random noise throughout the field and difference between reps and across the field, so we don't see a significant difference. But you come down here late season. We got it on at V13, and what do we see in yield? That yield held in there, statistically the same as our V5 application. So we just can't be as late probably as what we were. We have to have more nitrogen down. Is something we learned from these trials this year. And when you go to the control where we didn't put any nitrogen on, grew 115 bushels of corn. That's not too bad for not adding any nitrogen at all to that field. We had a lot of really good mineralization on this farm. Another trial we're going to look at, talk a little bit more in depth about some other things that were happening on this one in particular. So this one we pulled in some remote imagery. The trial all stays above the red part of the field. You get down in the red section, it starts to roll, and there's a couple gullies there. And where it's nice and red, it's because there isn't any corn, because the planter doesn't get down the bottom of the gullies. He doesn't till it. There might be some reasons why you should try to close those in. Most of it's getting planted to grass waterways over time. But that's why you see those red areas more than they're not actually in the trial. So when we look at the two treatments on this one, we didn't go in at V5. Our first treatment was V10, and then we came back in at VT. These were both pushed back a little bit more because of weather than what they were supposed to be. The early application was supposed to be V7, V8, and then we wanted to be about V12 for our late application. Weather just kept pushing us back this year. It didn't harm our yield all that much. Treatments up front, we had 72 pounds down across the entire farm. And then we came back on where we're going to do a late application. We had 97 pounds down. So at V10 we came back, we put a really light rate on because we wanted to have about 100 pounds of nitrogen out there. Soil available at V10, 113 pounds soil available. And then at VT, where we had 72 pounds down, it was 60. And where we had 97 pounds down, there was 99 pounds plant available at that time. So we start looking, what's the soil test tell us, and what was the variation across the field? This is really the first thing you really have to start digging into if you're going to start using soil tests, is how much variation you're going to find in these soils as you go across the farm. So we pull in how much nitrogen's in the soil. There was 15 gallons of 28 down with burn down. Was that really going to be available for the corn crop? That was a big question. We invested 15 gallons of 28%. A lot of times when we think about using that burn down, we expect it all to be gone, but the grower believes it helps his herbicide program, so he wants to invest in it. Put 9 gallons on with the planter. So there's a total of 72 pounds of 28 out on that field total if we really were able to recapture it all. So we start looking. The first sample section has 70 pounds of nitrogen soil available. Go to the next section, 78 pounds, 116 pounds, and then 170 pounds in one spot on that farm of soil available nitrogen. So we have a lot of nitrogen showing back up at this V6, V7 time frame. We're out there soil sampling to try to set our rates. So from there we determined that the maximum return to nitrogen for him was 189 total pounds of nitrogen, and that was the top rate he wanted to go with. And then looking at the equations and how much soil available nitrogen we had, we didn't see a reason to flex it above that. So our other rates were 150 and 105 pounds. Where we had 189 pounds, we grew 273 bushels of corn. Dropped that to 150, pulled basically 40 units of nitrogen out. Same statistical yield of 266 bushels. Pulled 40 units of nitrogen out at 40 cents a unit. That saved him $16. Then we go to the V14 is when we pulled the samples for our VT application. At that time frame we go out where we had put on that 189 pounds, 122 still plant available. That's enough to finish that corn crop out without a problem. Where we had 150 out there, 99 pounds of plant available. We had 100 more pounds we could take up. We had enough to finish the crop easily at tassel. 105, where we had 105 units of nitrogen out, 80 units soil available. We were thinking that could be stressed at that point, but we wanted to see what we got for yield. And then for our late application, we had 100 pounds on already, and we were running right around 50 pounds plant available. We were expecting some more to mineralize out of the soil. We're sitting on a 4% organic matter soil in this trial. So we were thinking we needed about 100 to 125 pounds of nitrogen to become available to finish the crop. So we go back in at VT, set our top rate at 150. So we put on 50 more units of nitrogen, and then we put on 126 and 105. As I mentioned before, we're thinking VT is a little bit too late to be out for our last application of nitrogen unless we had more out early on. We don't know that for sure, but we did see a yield loss coming back in late. But we also saw a yield loss from another factor. We're still learning to drive the sprayer. So, well, the video's not going to play. So we're out right as the tassel's coming out, and we're learning to drive the sprayer, and we found about an 8 bushel loss just due to sprayer damage across the 24 rows. And we were able to factor out the planter damage by looking at other sections in the field. And there's a little bit of the sprayer needed tuned in a little because it was sitting at 124 inches center instead of 120 due to some bushing wear. But that 8 bushels is big, and we didn't see that on the earlier applications because as we got going through the wave of corn, we'd start to correct to one side, realize we went too far, we'd bring the ship back, overcorrect, and on this size of corn, when we actually sidewalled it with the tire, they're making fun of me in the back. When we sidewalled with the tire, we were snapping it off. At earlier stages, what we caused when we sidewalled it was a little bit of gooseneck. And when we were in there at V10, we got it to gooseneck and it came back. When we were in at tassel, we actually snapped it off when we saw major yield loss due to that application. So the story was we were probably a little late on nitrogen and we better learn to drive the sprayer a lot better. And maybe even it'll pay to get different orifices and slow down. Maybe we don't need to be driving the sprayer at 10 mile an hour side dressing and BT corn. So unfortunately that doesn't play, but you feel like you're going through the ocean of corn very quickly. And the video was shot in a shorter section. There's some areas where it was coming up between our bars we had put on to help lay the plants over in front of the window. So we used technology to help determine rates. One more trial quickly that was done with this V5 and V10. Saw a very similar thing where V5 at all of our rates out-yielded V10, and really we could go down to this 150 pounds of nitrogen, and we saw the same yield in this study as what we saw at 210 pounds of nitrogen. So that maximum return to nitrogen equation is probably a good place to start, and then try to use your soils to determine, in this year, do we seem to have a lot of soil available nitrogen? Can we start to flex that down with a later season application? And if it's been raining a lot and you put a lot on preload, then maybe you would need to come back and make up for that in leached losses or volatilization. Why was late season too late? Pull this study out of Missouri. They're showing that anything after basically the corn's over my head, 4 or 5 feet, over that 5-foot stage, if you don't have any nitrogen out, you start seeing a yield loss. Now if we had some nitrogen out there, that starts to correct itself, because this was really done to look at those rescue treatments. It is valuable to come out all the way till tassel and provide that rescue treatment as long as you have a healthy crop. But that's a sign that maybe we need to look at getting more of the nitrogen on early and coming back with a smaller rate for our final decision. Using this soil test, what did we do? Commercial nitrogen had been applied, so we pulled a 12-inch deep sample. Depending on the day, a 12-inch deep sample can be fairly hard to do. Some people recommend doing a 24-inch deep sample. I usually struggled to get my probe in 12 inches. Had to jump on it pretty good to shove it in 12 inches in a few fields. And then we did an ammonium and a nitrate N test. Had it reported back as nitrogen in both of those forms, so we could tell what was out there totally available. Even if you're doing manure, the old PSNTs really just look at nitrate. It may be valuable to actually take that ammonia also and have them run both samples so you can start looking at the total nitrogen in the field, because your plant's going to uptake the ammonia just like it will the nitrate. You took the sample depth and then multiplied that, divided by 3, multiplied it by parts per million, and that gave you the soil available N that was out there, that we could have plant available at that point in time. Problem is, nitrogen does move deeper than 1 foot, but if you're going to get a sample deeper than 1 foot, you definitely need a probe probably with 2 pogo pegs on it, so when you jump on it, you can get it into the ground and get it back out. There are some charts available if you want to try to look at how much was applied and use that to try to determine how much you lost due to rain. And then you have to look at your sampling protocol. So if you haven't put any nitrogen out, or if it was an entire broadcast application, like if all we did was the herbicide burn down, you just do that normal zigzag pattern like you would for a typical soil test in a block of the field. Ideally, you'll be able to find a couple soil tests, maybe use bare soils to try to determine different areas of the field, because you definitely see differences in nitrogen availability. But if we put nitrogen on with the planter, and then when we came back and we had already Y-dropped it, we had to start looking at how to make sure we sampled equally across the field. So we used a protocol basically of doing a straight line across a row of corn. When I did it, I went 3 to 4 inches, and I pulled a 12-inch sample each time, and we put about 5 samples together to make that sample set we sent into the lab. But you had to make sure you actually sampled the whole way across and got one in that row, so you were around the areas where you had put on the nitrogen. I mean, if you ran down through the middle, you don't want to pull your only sample if you side dress where that heavy nitrogen band was. It does move throughout the soil, but you'll still see that variation as you go across and how much nitrogen is available to where you applied it. We used a little bit of Ndvi readings to look at crop health. I was using handhelds this year. Hopefully next year we move to doing more aerial and try to get a better reading across that entire field a lot easier, and use that along with some bare soils and even soil sampling to try to make some zones and variable rate across the field. An Ndvi sensor trial that was done in 14 and 16, the sensor average rate was 146 pounds, grew 206 bushels of corn, and then the 0 grew 134 and up to 250 pounds, 214. So that sensor did a good job of decreasing the total nitrogen put on while still maintaining yield. And it's not too hard if you use the handheld sensor, if you want to start there. Oklahoma houses the calculator. It's fairly easy to use. But the important thing is you need to know when you plant it. If you mess up your growing degree days, it entirely messes up the equation on how much nitrogen it's going to want you to apply. Because typically you're estimating too low on growing degree days, and then it tells you to put on a lot more nitrogen than what you really needed. Stock nitrates, the last one we'll talk about, is trying to use at the end of the season, come back and take your yield maps after you have multiple years of corn. You can't use 1 or 2 years of data. You need to probably pull in 3 or 4 years of corn data and start looking, do we have low areas of the field? If we've been applying a constant rate of nitrogen and we've been planting at a constant population across the field, do we have low yielding areas? And do we have high yielding areas? Then we can go back in and pull end of season stock nitrate tests and start looking at what nitrogen is doing in that field. When we are low in yield, do we have low or high nitrate levels? If we have high nitrate levels, we might as well back the nitrogen rate off because the nitrogen we're putting on isn't increasing our yield and we can save money. Are we running out of nitrogen? If we're running out of nitrogen, that's probably our yield limiting factor. Then we can look at either maybe a split application because for some reason that section of the field leach is really bad. Or maybe we just need more nitrogen in that part of the field because we're having less mineralization. But you can't take just 1 year of data and make those maps and decisions. Or if you use populations, if you use variable rate population and you already decided that this area of the field is low yielding, so you backed off the population and it continues to be low yielding, and then you go and decide to do your nitrogen decision on top of that and change the nitrogen rate, now population might have been your limiting factor because you backed that off because you had a low yielding area and you didn't really know why it was low, so you lowered your populations.